Hi, everybody, and welcome to Big Joe's Journal. This week, of course, is, for example, today is the first official day of winter, which came in at about 5 a.m. this morning. It's kind of hard to believe, that we haven't had winter for the last couple of weeks with all the snow and the cold weather and everything, but according to official records, winter started this morning. And surprisingly, the first day of winter, the weather's been a little bit better than it has been the last few days of fall. Well, of course, this week, is Christmas. December 25th, falling on Friday of this week. And that's what we're going to talk about today is Christmas. Now, Christmas is celebrated in many ways. Our Jewish friends, for example, are celebrating Hanukkah. And everything kind of comes together. Now, why do we celebrate Christmas on December 25th? Well, first of all, at the time of the Nativity of Christ, Rome was the master of the European world, and their empire extended from the British Isles down through Western Europe, into North Africa, probably down into the Sahara area, and well over into the Middle East, over as far as Persia. And at the end of the year, Rome's 10 months, the first 6 months were named after Roman gods. And when they came to month number 7, 8, 9, and 10, well, that's what they called them. September is 7 in Latin. So we had September, the 7th month, October, the 8th month, November, which is 9 in Latin, 9th month, and Decem is 10 in Latin, December, the 10th month. And at the end of the year, the Romans held a feast called the Feast of Saturnalia, which was a great feast of light. As much as they could have light in those days, it was all by candle and whale oil and stuff like that gave them their lighting. And it was also a time of giving to people that were less fortunate. And it was a time of celebration, the Feast of Light, the Feast of Saturnalia, worshiping the god of Saturn, who was the god of light and the god of fire. And it was a great way to wind up the year. Well, in Palestine, actually Galilee and Judea, the Jewish people also had a Feast of Lights called Hanukkah. And of course, Hanukkah is being celebrated right now by our Jewish friends around the world. When Christianity came in, the apostles and the gospel writers had no idea when Jesus was born. No idea at all. But the Christians, who primarily were converts from the Jewish faith, at the time, of course, Christians were being persecuted. You had the persecutions of Nero and Diocletian and Caligula and a number of other Roman emperors right up to the time of, up until around the year 315, before the persecution of Christians ended. And not only took place in Rome, it took place throughout the Roman Empire. And it would take the Emperor Constantine to bring it to an end, because even though he himself was not a Christian, his mother was. Saint Helena was. So you have a young religion coming in. They had just been named Christians. The first time the followers of Jesus were called Christians was at Antioch. And to practice their religion, of course, they were in the catacombs, which were underground tunnels and all that they dug out and settled in and held their religious services in. But the question was, they knew when Christ died, they knew when he rose from the dead, but they didn't know when he was born. Because most of his followers never knew Jesus, and Jesus was 30 years old. Up till the time he was 30, Jesus had worked as a carpenter, working with his foster father Joseph and doing carpentry work here and there around Galilee primarily. So the question was, well, how do we celebrate the birth of Christ? Well, they decided to take this Feast of Lights and make that the celebration of Christ's nativity. And I believe it was the second pope, the first pope, the Bishop of Rome, of course, is the pope. St. Peter, who was the head of the apostles, had gone from Galilee and Judea, and he'd wound up in Rome. And there he is. That was his final stop. In Rome, when he was executed, he was crucified, and crucified upside down. That was a Roman form of execution. St. Paul the apostle, he was beheaded, also in Rome. But the successor to Peter, the second pope, was Linus. And it was Pope Linus decided, well, why don't we take this Feast of Light and celebrate the nativity of Jesus? And so it came to be. And all through the centuries, the AD centuries, Anno Domini, after Christ, the year of our Lord, we have celebrated the nativity of Jesus on December 25th. Well, this was celebrated in Rome and spread throughout Europe into the Eastern Church over in Constantinople, in what is now Turkey and Syria, Iraq, and so forth. They celebrate Christmas a little bit later, and they still do to this day. In the Orthodox Church, Christmas is celebrated in January. And the way it was set up, that's the way it is today. And it's gone on, for the centuries. And Christmas has taken on more traditions. After 315, when Christianity was legalized in the Roman Empire, and also in the East, Christmas became a public feast. In fact, it replaced Saturnalia over a period of years. And the Emperor Constantine, he moved his capital from Rome. He moved over into Istanbul in Turkey, and renamed the city Constantinople, after himself, of course. Constantine, and then Nople standing for city of Constantine. And of course, as you know, over a period of time, if you're going back in history, there's a schism, the split in the church and the split in Christianity. The Eastern Church split off from Rome, and they have the Eastern Orthodox. And they continue in the Eastern Orthodox all through Greece and Turkey and the Greek Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox. Their Christmas will be in January, on January 6th, when here in the Western Church we're talking about the Feast of the Magi, when supposedly the Magi came to honor Christ. So that is the reason we celebrate Christmas in December. Now, in the year 505 AD, Pope Gregory the Great, Pope Gregory I, who had been a monk and had been a scientist and probably an astronomer, he determined that the Julian calendar was not exact. And so he drew up another calendar, and that's the calendar we use today, the Gregorian calendar. And he determined that there were 365 and 1/4 days in a full year. So how do you handle that? Well, he cut down the length of some of the months of the Julian calendar, and he created 2 other months. And instead of sticking them at the end of the year, he stuck them in the middle. So we go from June, the 6th month, and then instead of going into the 7th month, the 7th month all of a sudden becomes July, named after Julius Caesar. And the 8th month was named after Augustus Caesar, the month of August. And what had been the 7th month became the 9th month, although it still called itself 7, as we do today. The 8th month became number 9, October, even though it still says it's 8th. And November and 10, and December. 9 and 10 becoming 11 and 12. And the Julian calendar is the calendar that is in operation today through much of the English-speaking world. And, well, I shouldn't say that, the Romance language-speaking world, meaning Europe, North, South America, many parts of Asia. The Jewish people still have their own calendar, which dates from Moses. And in China, they have their own calendar, which is entirely different from where we are, and the same with Japan. So we have the Gregorian calendar that we operate under now. But when was Jesus really born? Well, if we look at history and what went on in the Roman Empire, we know that Jesus was not born in December, but he was born in late March and early April. And I have a personal theory. I think Jesus was born, and he either died or rose from the dead on the same day, 33 years apart. Because he began his public ministry at age 30, he was executed at age 33. And how do we know he was born in the spring? Well, as you know, the Romans weren't stupid. They created this huge empire, and they had to govern it. And they had to pay for it through taxation. And the same as we have today. We have a census today. We want to know how many people we've got. It affects our representation in Congress, but it's also for taxation purposes for the federal government. And they had to pick a time of year when they could run this thing without any part of the empire having an excuse saying, well, we can't go because it's too cold or too snowy or too hot or so forth. So they picked a time of year when the temperature was pretty much the same throughout the entire empire. And that was early spring, late March, early April. And so it was, and we know this from reading the gospel, that Joseph and Mary lived in Nazareth. And the way the Romans required this census taking, the husband or the head of the house had to go to the seat of his family. And in Joseph's case, Joseph was of the family of David, which meant he had to go to Bethlehem. So it means a trip from Nazareth south down through Jerusalem and then down to Bethlehem. And of course, they didn't have the limousines and the trains and all that in those days. You travel by animal. And in the case of Joseph and Mary, the carpentry business, you didn't get wealthy on it. It meant traveling by donkey. She rode the donkey and he walked with a walking stick. Well, a trip of that length, an estimate here in Vermont, it would be like going maybe from St. Albans to Rutland. And you know, if you had to walk it, you weren't going to walk it in one day. So they were required by law, go down, register, become part of the census, and then you go back to Nazareth. So the trip to Bethlehem, Mary riding on the donkey, and Mary very, very pregnant. And after a number of days, they arrive in Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem's not that big a community. And the descendants of David are very numerous. So consequently, what hotels they had down there, or places to stay in those days, had to be full. As you know, we know in the Christmas story that Joseph and Mary arrived there, and there was no room for them in the inn. Probably Joseph couldn't afford it anyway, because these merchants or innkeepers, all of a sudden, hey, they got a booming business. And just like the ski season here, price of a room is going to go up. Plus, by this time, Mary's baby bump was probably fairly large. And I'm sure the innkeeper said, well, I really, first of all, you can't afford the room. And he must have taken a look at Mary and said, but I tell you what I'll do. For a reduced rate, there's a stable down back. And you can go down there and settle in there for the night till something opens up, and so be it. So Joseph and Mary went out the back to the stable. And there was a feeding trough there, for the sheep and the goats and the other animals that are there. And Joseph took that trough, put some hay in it. They must have put a little sheet over it of some kind or another. And it was there that the baby Jesus was born. And he was laid in a manger. And that was this feeding trough that Joseph had converted into a temporary birthplace for Jesus, for the new baby. And it's rather interesting to note that the first of God's creatures to greet the birth of Jesus Christ were not outside of Mary and Joseph, were not other human beings, but they were the animals, the donkeys, the sheep, the goats, probably some camels from the wealthier people that had arrived and were staying up at the hotel and celebrating. And we know from the Gospel of Luke that the nativity had to take place in the spring. It talks about the shepherds out in the field tending their sheep. Well, if Jesus had been born in December in the middle of winter, the sheep would have been in the barn. The shepherds probably would have been in town hitting one of the watering holes, knocking down a few brews. But that wasn't the case. They were working. And of course, the Gospel of Luke tells us that angels appeared in the sky, told the shepherds that the Messiah that had been promised to Abraham and been foretold by all the Jewish prophets all through the Old Testament had arrived. And of course, they went in haste, and they found Joseph and Mary with the baby in a stable. It's rather interesting that Jesus, when he was born, was actually a homeless person. Joseph and Mary living in a stable. Not the most inviting of circumstances in which to give birth. But that's what happened. And we know more and more as we look back and we study this particular period in time and study the history of the Roman Empire, that every bit of evidence now points to the fact that Christ was born in the spring. But by tradition, the way it was set up, we still honor or celebrate the Nativity of Jesus in December. Coincides with the Feast of Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights of the Jewish people. Because remember, the first Christians were from the Jewish people. Christianity was born in Jerusalem, and it flowered in Rome. Through the Roman Empire, through Constantine, through emperors that followed him, Christianity spread throughout the Roman world. And later, with the discovery of 2 new continents, it spread there too, due to the settlers that came over here from Spain primarily, Portugal, England, France. So that's my theory on Christmas. Now let's talk about another guy. His name is St. Nicholas. There actually was a St. Nicholas. And he was in Turkey. He was the bishop of Myra in Turkey. And Myra was spelled M-Y-R-A. So Nicholas was the bishop in Myra, and the story goes that there was a man who had 3 daughters. But the custom was when a girl got married, her family had to provide a dowry to the family of the groom. In other words, saying, well, here's our gift to you for taking our daughter off our hands, more or less. And I'll probably get shot down for saying that. But that's the way it was. And the story goes that this guy was poor, couldn't afford the dowry, yet he wanted to marry off his 3 daughters. So Nicholas, hearing of his plight, got together 3 bags of gold, supposedly, and he dropped them on the doorstep of this guy, and he came out, here's a bag of gold, married off daughter 1, another bag, daughter 2, third bag, daughter 3. Well, as Christmas spread, and the solemn nature of Christmas, when it had to go, it went into Germany. And Germany had a lot to do with developing our Christmas traditions now. The Germans, in their pagan beliefs, even though they switched over to Christianity, had a very strong belief that God existed in trees. And so we have what we call Tannenbaum, the Christmas tree. And to celebrate the birth of Jesus, the custom was to take a tree and to bring it into your residence and to honor that tree, because from that tree would come the essence of God. And it would be part of the Christmas celebration. Well, they also adopted some of the idea of the Festival of Light, putting lights on the tree, putting decorations and trimming and making it bright, making it a time of festive, festive celebration. And they also decided that they wanted to have another figure. And so they adopted this legend of the Bishop of Myra, Nicholas, and they called him Kris Kringle. Kris Kringle. Well, somehow or another from Kris Kringle, once this tradition started spreading throughout Europe, Kris Kringle got a Latin name, Santa Claus. Santa is a Latin word for saint. So it's St. Claus. And this spread throughout the Roman Empire, came over to the New World when settlers moved over here. And somehow or another, over time, Santa Claus got a red suit. Nicholas was martyred, meaning he shed his blood for his faith. And tradition sort of says that this is where the red suit comes from. The connection between the blood of the martyr and the color of Santa's suit. And it would take a poem by, and I think he's an American, wrote the night before Christmas. And he makes Santa to be a chubby little fellow who drives a sleigh with 8 reindeer. And of course, later on, Gene Autry came on and added a 9th reindeer, and that was Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. And then the story of the elves, and it has just grown and grown and grown and grown. And it's a nice little fable for around Christmas. The evolution of Santa Claus from a real being to a mythical being. And for many, many, many people, Santa Claus is the spirit of this time of year, the spirit of giving, the spirit of caring for our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate, the spirit of families coming together throughout the world, which unfortunately this year, due to COVID-19, will not be happening. But it is a solemn time of year. And a thing that bothers me, I see on TV they're going to have something like 6 or 7 NBA basketball games on Christmas Day. The NFL doesn't want to be shut out of a Christmas market. So there's going to be a football game, I believe, between the Minnesota Vikings and the New Orleans Saints, either Christmas afternoon or Christmas night. It sort of takes away a little bit from the solemnity. Economically, this idea of giving, this idea of charity, it's a booming time for the economy, or has been in past years. This year, probably not so much. When people go out and shop and they buy presents, most of the presents they give to this one, give to that one, and so forth. And usually over time it becomes a bunch of junk there you want to get rid of a little bit later. But even though Christmas was not the real time, the birthday of Christ, it's still a time of celebration and a time of when you come together as a family. I know you got Christmas cards going all over the place. Some people, you haven't seen them for years, and all of a sudden you get a Christmas card from them. And, well, okay, it's a busy time of year for the post office. This particular time of year, this year, post office short on help, but with an overflow of business. A lot of people are shopping online through Amazon. How do their gifts arrive? Well, their gifts have to arrive either through the post office, which is going to cause a huge backlog, and already is, or through UPS or many of the other delivery services. This year, with so many people sick, with so much of the country having to be shut down, with so much uncertainty, especially with the economy, whether people are going to have jobs, how are they going to support their family, how are they going to pay their rent, pay their mortgage, how are they going to pay for their fuel. A time of tremendous uncertainty. We can use all the goodwill we can possibly muster up. You know, I was a kid in World War II, and I remember the Christmases back then, especially 42, when everybody was desperate. Germany was sweeping into Russia, had already knocked France out of the war, was bombing the heck out of England. The Japanese were sweeping down through the South Pacific. And you kind of wondered, you had to wonder, what does the future hold for us? I mean, there are some rumors there that we'd have to learn to speak German or learn to speak Japanese. And we questioned whether or not we were going to survive. Well, of course, a lot of our fears were unfounded. And a lot of things the government kept from us. For example, we were totally unaware that German U-boats were right off our Atlantic coast. And they were sinking a lot of our ships. Ships that sail out of New York, boom, they get beyond Long Island, they get nailed with a torpedo. We know that German submarines even went in as far as, almost as far as Newcastle, Delaware, and sank a ship being loaded with supplies under a Lend-Lease program that was either ticketed for Russia or ticketed for England. And they torpedoed the ship at the dock. We know after the war that many of these German submarines that were off our coast, as they surfaced, they pretty much caught our military by surprise. And especially the fact that many of the German sailors had taken leave in the United States, usually wearing U.S. uniforms, that they had tickets to our ball games, tickets to other places of entertainment, especially in Florida, around Miami and Tampa, that area where they'd been in the Gulf of Mexico. We were totally unaware that German U-boats were so close to our shores and were doing such an amount of damage. But this year is going to be a very, very special holiday season. And I certainly wish you all the best. God love you, in God and have a great holiday season. May Almighty God, in His infinite wisdom, continue to bless these United States of America. And let's hang in there, folks. Better days are coming. You just got to believe it. And let's move ahead. Have a great week and a great Christmas.